What happens when a rising star sits down for what should be a routine morning show interview, only to find herself blindsided by questions that cross every professional line? The cameras were rolling, millions were watching, and what unfolded became one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. Raye, the British singer and songwriter who has been dominating charts and breaking records, walked onto the Today Show set, expecting to talk about her music, her tour, her creative process. What she got instead was an interrogation that would push her to a breaking point nobody saw coming. This is the full story of what really happened during that interview, the exact words that were exchanged, and the moment everything fell apart. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because you are not going to believe how this escalates. The interview started normally enough. Raye walked onto the set, took her seat across from the host, Daniel Matthews, and exchanged the usual pleasantries. The studio audience applauded, the cameras focused in, and Daniel opened with a smile that seemed warm and welcoming. Daniel began, his voice smooth and practiced. "So Raye, congratulations on everything you have achieved this year. The album, the sold-out shows, the awards. It has been quite a journey for you." Raye smiled, clearly comfortable in the moment. "Thank you so much. It has been surreal, honestly. I have worked towards this my entire life, and to see it all coming together, it feels like a dream." Daniel nodded, flipping through some notes on his card. "Your album has resonated with so many people. The themes you explore, the vulnerability in your lyrics. What made you decide to be so open about your personal experiences?" Raye leaned forward slightly, her passion for the subject evident. "I think music is at its best when it is honest. I have been through things, like everyone has, and I wanted to create something that other people could connect with. When you share your truth, it gives other people permission to acknowledge theirs. That connection is everything to me." The conversation continued smoothly for several minutes. They discussed her songwriting process, her influences, her favorite moments from the tour. Raye was articulate, genuine, and clearly enjoying the exchange. The audience was engaged, laughing at her anecdotes about life on the road and applauding when she spoke about the fans who had supported her journey. Then Daniel shifted in his seat, and something in his tone changed. His smile remained, but there was a new edge to his voice. "So Raye, I want to talk about something that has been circulating online. There have been some discussions about your past collaborations, specifically about situations where you felt you were not given proper credit for your work. Can you walk us through what actually happened in those situations?" Raye's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She took a breath before responding. "Well, that is a complex situation. The music industry has a lot of challenges, especially for young artists who are still finding their footing. I have been vocal about wanting proper recognition for the work I have done, and I think that is something a lot of artists, particularly women, can relate to." Daniel pressed forward. "But there were specific incidents, right? Where you wrote songs for major artists, and your name was left off the credits entirely? That must have felt like betrayal." Raye paused, clearly measuring her words. "I would not use the word betrayal. It was frustrating, yes. It was a learning experience about how this business works and about advocating for yourself. But I have moved past those situations, and I am focused on what I am creating now." Daniel was not letting it go. "But do you think you were taken advantage of because of your age, your gender, or maybe because you were too trusting?" The question hung in the air. Raye's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think," she said carefully, "that the industry has systemic issues that affect many artists. It is not about me being too trusting. It is about power dynamics and how they play out in creative spaces. I learned to protect myself and my work, and that is what matters." Daniel leaned back, his tone shifting again. "Speaking of protecting yourself, there have been rumors about your personal life. specifically about a relationship that ended quite publicly. How much of your album is about that relationship? And do you think your ex will recognize himself in the songs? Raye's posture stiffened. Her voice, when she spoke, was noticeably cooler. I do not really think that is relevant to the conversation about my music as art. Daniel smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. But your music is personal. You said so yourself. You write from experience. So when fans are listening to these deeply emotional songs, they are listening to your real experiences, right? Including heartbreak? Including relationships that did not work out? Raye shifted in her seat. My music is personal, yes, but that does not mean every song is a diary entry that needs to be decoded. I write from a place of emotion and truth, but I also create art. There is a difference between being honest in your work and having every detail of your private life dissected. Fair enough, Daniel said, though his tone suggested he was far from finished. But you have been open about mental health struggles, about anxiety and difficult periods in your life. How do you balance being that vulnerable publicly while also wanting privacy in other areas? Raye took a visible breath, clearly working to maintain her composure. I share what I am comfortable sharing. Mental health is something I talk about because I think it is important to destigmatize those conversations. But having boundaries about other aspects of my life is not contradictory. It is healthy. Daniel nodded slowly, then pivoted again. Let us talk about something else that has come up recently. There was some criticism online about comments you made regarding other artists in the industry. Some people felt you were being dismissive of certain genres or styles of music. What is your response to that? Raye's brow furrowed. I have never been dismissive of other artists. I have talked about what resonates with me personally, what influences my work, but I have always maintained respect for people creating in different spaces. But you did say, Daniel continued, reading from his notes, that some contemporary pop music feels manufactured and lacks soul. That is a direct quote from an interview you did. Are you saying that was taken out of context? Raye's voice grew firmer. I was talking about the industry machine, not about individual artists. I was talking about how sometimes commercial pressure can strip away authenticity. It was not an attack on anyone specifically. But can you see how other artists might have taken it that way? Daniel pressed. Especially artists who work in more commercial pop spaces, who might feel like you are positioning yourself as somehow more legitimate or authentic than they are? That was not my intention, and I think anyone who follows my work knows I do not operate that way, Raye said, her patience clearly wearing thin. I support other artists. I celebrate other artists. One comment about industry practices is not an indictment of everyone making music. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. The audience had grown quiet, sensing the shift in energy. Daniel pressed on, seemingly undeterred by Raye's increasingly defensive posture. All right, let us move to another topic then, Daniel said. Your rise to success has been remarkable, but it has also been relatively recent compared to some of your peers who have been in the industry longer. Do you ever feel pressure to prove that you are not just a flash in the pan, that you have real staying power? Raye stared at him for a long moment. I think my work speaks for itself. I have been making music for years, and the fact that it is reaching a wider audience now does not diminish the decade of work that came before it. But there is always that question with sudden success. Is it sustainable? Daniel continued, his tone almost casual despite the weight of the question. How do you handle the pressure of knowing that the industry and the public can be fickle, that someone new could come along and the attention could shift? I make music because I love it, not because I am chasing attention, Raye said, her voice tight. The success is incredible, and I am grateful, but it is not what defines my purpose as an artist. Daniel smiled again, that same practiced expression. Of course. Now, I want to ask about something a bit more sensitive. There have been some allegations from people who worked with you early in your career, people who say that you were difficult to work with, that you had unrealistic expectations. How do you respond to those claims? The shift in the room was immediate. Raye's entire demeanor changed. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. I am sorry. What allegations? From whom? Daniel gestured vaguely with his hand. There have been some industry insiders who have spoken, not publicly with their names attached, but there have been whispers about your behavior in studio sessions, about you being demanding or hard to collaborate with. Raye leaned forward, her voice sharp. So you are asking me to respond to anonymous accusations that may or may not even exist? That is not journalism. That is gossip. I think it is fair to address things that are being said, Daniel countered, his tone remaining even. Your reputation is part of your public persona, and if there are concerns being raised, do you not think your fans deserve to hear your side? My fans know me through my work and through how I show up for them, Raye shot back. I do not owe anyone a response to nameless, faceless accusations that you cannot even verify. If someone has a problem with me, they can say it with their chest, not hide behind anonymous sources. The audience was completely silent now. Even the crew seemed to have frozen, sensing that something was unraveling in real time. Daniel, however, seemed energized by the confrontation. Fair point, he said. Let me ask you this instead. You have been very vocal about wanting more control over your career, about being independent and making your own decisions. But there have been reports that you have fired multiple team members, managers, publicists, people who were trying to help you navigate this industry. Do you think maybe some of that difficulty people talk about comes from you not being willing to take advice or collaborate effectively? Raye's face flushed. You are making assumptions based on what, exactly? Yes, I have changed team members. That is not uncommon in this industry. Sometimes professional relationships do not work out. That does not make me difficult. That makes me someone who knows what I need to succeed. But when it is a pattern, Daniel pressed, when multiple people are no longer working with you, does that not suggest that maybe the common denominator is you? Or maybe it suggests that I have high standards and I am not willing to compromise my vision, Raye countered, her voice rising slightly. I have worked too hard and waited too long for this moment to let other people dictate how I navigate it. If that makes me difficult, then I guess I am difficult. Daniel nodded slowly, as if considering this. Let us talk about your vision then. You have been very outspoken about representation in the music industry, about diversity, about giving platforms to underrepresented voices. But some critics have pointed out that your own team, your band, your collaborators, are not particularly diverse. How do you reconcile advocating for these issues while not necessarily reflecting them in your immediate circle? Raye stared at him, and for a moment she seemed genuinely stunned. I work with incredibly talented people. I do not hire people based on checking boxes. I hire people who are the best at what they do, and who I connect with creatively. But if you are going to speak on these issues, should you not be actively working to create opportunities? Daniel asked. Or is it more about the appearance of advocacy, without the actual work? That is completely unfair, Raye said, her voice shaking slightly now, though whether from anger or hurt was unclear. You have no idea what conversations I have, what decisions I make, what I do behind the scenes to support other artists and create opportunities. Just because I do not post about every single thing on social media does not mean it is not happening. So it is happening, but we just have to take your word for it? Daniel said, his eyebrows raised. Yes, actually, Raye snapped. Just like I am supposed to take your word that these anonymous allegations exist, that these reports you keep mentioning are real. You want me to defend myself against shadows while you get to sit there and act like you are just asking reasonable questions. I am asking questions that I think the public wants answers to, Daniel said calmly. That is my job. No, Raye said, shaking her head. Your job is to have an actual conversation, not to ambush someone with accusations and then frame it as journalism. This is not an interview. This is something else entirely. I understand you are feeling defensive, Daniel started, but Raye cut him off. Do not tell me how I am feeling, she said sharply. I am not defensive. I am calling out what this is. You invited me here to talk about my music, my tour, my creative process. Instead, you have spent the last 15 minutes trying to paint me as some kind of villain based on rumors and unverified claims. Why? Daniel remained composed. I am trying to give you an opportunity to address things that are being said about you. Things that you are saying, Raye corrected. You keep referencing these reports, these insiders, these allegations. Where are they coming from? Who are these people? Because it sounds to me like you are hiding behind the idea of sources to ask questions that you know are inflammatory and unfair. The atmosphere in the studio had become electric with tension. Producers off camera were exchanging glances, clearly uncertain about whether to intervene. The audience sat motionless, watching the exchange with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. Daniel shifted tactics. Let me ask you about something specific then. Your song, Escapism, became a massive hit, but there was some controversy around the content, some parents saying it was inappropriate for younger listeners. Do you feel any responsibility for the messages in your music reaching audiences that might be too young for those themes? I make music for adults, Raye said flatly. I have never marketed myself to children. If parents are concerned about what their kids are listening to, that is a conversation between them and their children. I am not a babysitter. I am an artist. But you have to know that young people look up to you, Daniel said. When you sing about certain experiences, about partying, about relationships, about coping mechanisms that might not be healthy, does it concern you that impressionable listeners might take that as an endorsement? My music is not an instruction manual, Raye said, her frustration evident. It is expression. It is storytelling. If people, young or old, cannot distinguish between an artist sharing their experience and an artist telling them how to live their life, that is a media literacy issue, not an artist responsibility issue. So you feel no responsibility at all for your influence? Daniel asked. That is not what I said, Raye replied, her voice strained. I said I am not responsible for parenting other people's children or for how my art is interpreted beyond its intention. I put thought and care into what I create. I am honest about my experiences. That is what I owe my listeners. I do not owe them a sanitized version of my life just because someone might misunderstand it. Daniel leaned forward. There seems to be a theme here in your responses. A lot of, I am not responsible. A lot of pushing back against any kind of accountability. Do you see that? Raye laughed, but there was no humor in it. Accountability for what, exactly? For making music? For having standards in my professional relationships? For not wanting to respond to anonymous gossip? What exactly am I supposed to be accountable for in this conversation? For how you conduct yourself, how you treat people, how your words and actions impact others, Daniel said. These are basic things that everyone, regardless of their profession, should consider. And I do consider them, Raye said, her voice dropping to something quieter but more intense. Every single day. But what you are doing right now is not about accountability. This is about trying to make me look bad, trying to create a narrative that does not exist. You came into this with an agenda. My agenda is to have an honest conversation, Daniel said. No, Raye said firmly. An honest conversation requires good faith on both sides. You have shown me none. You have taken things out of context, referenced sources you will not name, made assumptions about my character and my work, and expected me to just sit here and take it with a smile. I expected you to be able to handle tough questions, Daniel said. That is part of being in the public eye. Tough questions are fine, Raye said. I have answered plenty of tough questions, but there is a difference between tough and disrespectful. There is a difference between holding someone accountable and trying to tear them down. I am not trying to tear you down, Daniel said, though his expression suggested otherwise. I am trying to get past the public relations version of you and have a real conversation. You want real? Raye asked, her voice rising again. Here is real. I have worked my entire life to get to where I am. I have faced rejection, discrimination, exploitation. I have been told I am not good enough, not marketable enough, not the right fit. I have had my work stolen, my voice diminished, my talent questioned. And I kept going because I believed in what I was doing. Now, I am finally getting the recognition I deserve, and people like you want to find every possible reason to diminish that, to make it seem like I do not deserve it, or like there is something wrong with me for demanding respect. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Raye was not finished. Her voice had found a new strength, a clarity that cut through the tension in the room. You sit here with your notes, and your anonymous sources, and your carefully crafted questions designed to make me look defensive, or difficult, or ungrateful. But what you are really doing is showing exactly why so many artists, especially women of color, struggle in this industry. Because no matter what we do, no matter how hard we work, no matter how much we achieve, there is always someone ready to question whether we deserve it, whether we are too much, whether we are handling it the right way. I think you are deflecting, Daniel said, his composure finally showing a crack. You are making this about bigger issues instead of addressing the specific concerns I have raised. The specific concerns you have raised are based on nothing, Raye said. You have not presented a single, verifiable fact. You have asked me to defend myself against ghosts. And when I try to explain my perspective, you twist it into something else. You say, I am not taking accountability when I am simply refusing to accept blame for things I have not done wrong. So you have done nothing wrong, Daniel said, his tone almost mocking now. In your entire career, in all your professional relationships, in how you conduct yourself, you have made no mistakes. Of course I have made mistakes, Raye said, her exasperation evident. I am human, but that is not what this is about. You are not asking me about mistakes I have acknowledged or grown from. You are making up problems and then acting shocked when I will not confess to them. The audience had begun to shift uncomfortably in their seats. A few whispers rippled through the crowd. The energy was no longer just tense, it was uncomfortable, painful to witness. This had ceased to be entertainment and had become something raw and real. Let me ask you something, Raye said, leaning forward. Why did you really bring me here today? Was it ever about my music, or was this always the plan? To try to break me down on camera? To get a viral moment? To create controversy? Daniel straightened in his chair. That is a ridiculous accusation. We booked you because you are newsworthy, because people want to hear from you. People want to hear from me about my art, Raye said, not about anonymous gossip and manufactured controversies. You could have asked me about my songwriting process in depth, about the stories behind specific songs, about my influences, about what I am working on next. Those are questions that serve your audience. Instead, you chose this. I chose to ask questions that go beyond surface-level promotion, Daniel countered. I chose to have a substantive conversation. Substantive, Raye repeated, shaking her head. You keep using that word like it justifies what you are doing, but there is nothing substantive about this. Substantive would be engaging with my work, with my artistic choices, with my perspective on the industry based on my lived experience. What you have done is try to make me defend my existence, my character, my worth. I think you are being overly sensitive, Daniel said, and the words landed like a match on gasoline. Raye went very still. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but lethal. There it is. I was wondering when we would get to that. I push back on your questions. I defend myself against baseless accusations. I call out the nature of this conversation, and I am overly sensitive. That is the oldest trick in the book. dismiss a woman's legitimate grievances by suggesting she is just too emotional to handle the conversation. That is not what I said, Daniel protested. It is exactly what you said, Raye replied. You just used different words. But we both know what overly sensitive means when you say it to a woman who is refusing to back down. You are putting words in my mouth, Daniel said, his frustration finally showing clearly. I am trying to conduct an interview, and you are turning this into some kind of political statement. Everything is political when you are someone like me, Raye said. My existence in this industry is political. My success is political. The fact that I am sitting here having to defend myself against attacks you would never level at a male artist is political. So yes, I am making it political, because it always was. Daniel shuffled his notes, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. Look, I think we have gotten off track here. Let me ask you about your upcoming tour dates. No, Raye said simply. The word hung in the air like a command. Daniel blinked. No? No, Raye repeated. I am not going to sit here and pretend the last 20 minutes did not happen. I am not going to let you pivot to safe questions now and act like we are having a friendly chat. You made a choice about how this interview was going to go, and now you have to live with that choice. I am trying to move forward, Daniel said, and there was a note of pleading in his voice now, trying to get the interview back on track. The interview was never on track, Raye said. It was an ambush from the beginning, and I am done participating in it. So you are refusing to continue the interview, Daniel said, and it was clear he was trying to frame the moment for the cameras, for the inevitable headlines. I am refusing to continue being disrespected on national television, Raye clarified. There is a difference. You can spin this however you want, but everyone watching knows what happened here. They saw you try to tear me down, and they saw me refuse to let you. This is very unprofessional, Daniel said, his composure crumbling further. We had an agreement, a scheduled segment. And you violated that agreement the moment you decided to use this platform to attack me instead of interview me, Raye said. Professional goes both ways, Daniel. You do not get to be unprofessional and then hide behind professionalism when someone calls you out. The producers were now visible at the edge of the shot, making gestures, clearly trying to signal something to Daniel. He ignored them, his focus entirely on Raye. If you walk out now, it will be all anyone talks about, Daniel said. It will overshadow everything else. Is that really what you want? What I want is to be treated with basic respect, Raye said, standing up from her chair. The sudden movement seemed to startle everyone. What I want is to have conversations about my work that are actually about my work. What I want is to exist in this industry without having to constantly prove I deserve to be here. But clearly, that is too much to ask from you and from this show. You are making a mistake, Daniel said, also standing now, though it seemed more reflexive than intentional. No, Raye said, her voice steady and clear. The mistake was thinking this would be different. The mistake was believing that you would approach this with integrity. The mistake was mine for coming here in the first place, but I am correcting that mistake right now. She reached up and removed the microphone that had been clipped to her clothing. The gesture was deliberate, final. She handed it to a nearby crew member, who took it with uncertain hands. Raye, wait! Daniel called out, but she was already walking toward the edge of the set. The cameras followed her movement, unsure whether to keep rolling. Raye did not look back. Her stride was purposeful, her head held high. She walked past the stunned audience members, past the crew scrambling to figure out what to do, past the producers who were frozen in shock. Daniel stood alone on the set, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been embarrassment. He looked at the cameras, then at his notes, then back at where Raye had been sitting moments before. Well, he said, his voice strained. That was unexpected. We will take a quick break. The studio erupted into chaos the moment the cameras cut. Raye had drawn a line, refusing to accept the terms that had been forced upon her, choosing her dignity over compliance. She walked through those studio doors and disappeared from view, leaving behind one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. So there you have it, the full breakdown of what went down when Raye walked off the Today Show. If you made it this far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Let me know, do you think Raye was justified in walking out, or should she have handled it differently? I want to hear your thoughts.